Hello viewers, in Gran Turismo 7's recent update 1.31, they completely overhauled the physics of the game. And so I felt this ample opportunity to jump in and see if this is a change for the better or for the worse. So first up here we have the Nurburgring Nordschleife circuit experience, quite a tricky challenge, a tricky car around a difficult circuit. As I prove here by turning left on a straight, going immediately into the wall. And it wasn't about to get much better on this attempt, as you can see, turning left on a straight once again. And meeting barrier for the second time. And I think it was a good opportunity here to really learn the ins and outs of this new set of physics. And the first thing I was really noticing was simply that you had to be a lot more considered with your inputs. And so just brute forcing a car into the corner by really turning and cranking the steering angle, then smashing the brakes, doesn't really work as well. You do have to be a lot more gentle with all of those inputs. So eventually I managed to set a fairly decent time on Sector 1, and actually it was good enough for number 1 in the world, just in front of Inconvenient Toe, the well-known GOAT. And so with that done, that settled, I felt I should jump onto the full Nordschleife and see what I can do around here. And try to put my learnings to the test in what is a very difficult test. And that proved to be the case here, as I just steered, well, I didn't really steer, did I? And here, again, it's a straight, but I'm turning left, which is not what you want to be doing. And here, it's a left, but I'm turning right. Absolutely not ideal. Eventually, I managed to set a 6:30, which I felt happy with. And I was realising the main things. Understeer is very prevalent, especially when you're holding down the brake into a corner. So trail braking is a lot harder to do. And there's difficulty on the power. And to be honest, in general, it's just a case of you have to be a lot more thoughtful with your inputs. You have to press the brake a bit more gentle, lift off a bit more gently, steer a bit more gently, and accelerate a bit more gently. So all of these things just mean you have to underdrive the car, and that is better really than brute forcing it and overdriving the car. And you see on this second attempt, the Ghost started 2 seconds ahead, and so I caught up by 2 seconds on this second lap, which was pretty good. And this kind of reminded me of this moment here. This was from March 2022. This was actually before the game even came out, so this is the original set of physics in the game. Quite a spectacular moment. And this time around, you see they're getting through that section just fine. And so it kind of made me think, is this new set of physics close to the original back in March 22? And I think it's closer, but it's not the same. It definitely isn't the same. I think it's better than the original. There's no question about that. That was a good enough for ninth in the world, just behind Who Is Your Daddy? And with that done, next up we have the Ford Mustang, and it's definitely necessary to test road cars as well as race cars, as they do handle fairly different in Gran Turismo. And so I jumped into this, the Ford Mustang, which was the car of choice for the recent time trial. So it was a car that I've driven fairly recently, and the first thing I was noticing was just how much lighter and agile the car feels. It doesn't feel so heavy and cumbersome as road cars pretty much always used to on this game. It really did feel like an aircraft carrier in the past, with a turning circle of about 8 years. But now the car actually just feels a bit nicer, it feels a bit lighter, and that was, for me, a very positive improvement. So I was quite happy with this first test here of a road car. Yes, it's only one car around one track, but it felt positive to me. Taking a quick look at my settings on the wheel, so 7 and 6, and I didn't change those, and quickly my FANATEC settings here for anyone who wants to see them. So quickly what I would say is that my feeling on the wheel was that it felt a bit heavier in the race cars, but a bit lighter in the road cars. And I actually had to turn the wheel a lot more. So my rotation, I felt like I had to rotate the wheel more to get it to turn. So those are things I was noticing. But next up, we're going to take a look at the comparison of the daily race leaderboards from after the update to before, and daily race A, not really much difference, kind of the same times being set. In daily race B is actually quite different. So as you can see here, after the update, the fastest time is a 28.2, but before the update, it was a 27.4, so like 3/4 of a second difference, and different cars as well. And daily race C was quite a big difference. So after the update, 35.7 is the fastest lap, and before it was the 34.1, so nearly 2 seconds difference, so 2 seconds slower after the update. Now, a lot of that is actually down to the BOP change rather than the physics change. So as you can see here, the red column, a lot of the cars have dropped maybe 20 or 30 performance points in the recent BOP change, and that's actually the main reason the cars are slower rather than the physics. And if you look at row number 45, you have the GR Toyota Supra, and this is the car of choice at the moment for daily race C, mainly because it actually has the highest PP and it had the smallest drop compared to most other cars. And I felt like, therefore, I should give it a go, see if it handles nicely for me. And kind of like before with the BMW at Nordschleife, you are going to experience quite a fair amount of understeer, and that's probably the main reason why the cars are slower compared to before. You can see here, trying to hold the brake whilst turning, that car just did not want to turn into that corner at all. I definitely went in a bit too hot. But the positive for me was not that crashing, but it was that I felt comfortable on the circuit for the first time in quite a long time. The def chicane is, it lives up to its name really, doesn't it? You're going to experience many deaths, but for me, for the first time that I can really remember, I actually felt quite comfortable in this car around this track, and that's very rare. So you see here, just really throwing it in, having confidence to do that. Yes, I did hit the wall on that occasion, but I was able to get this down a lot more consistently than I think I did ever before. And therefore, this update, it feels good to me. It feels more positive. It feels like the cars are they're more settled if you drive them properly, whereas before you can kind of brute force it. So you see there, I was getting some fairly consistent lap times, which kind of suggests to me that I'm fairly comfortable with the car, especially on quite a difficult circuit. Difficult combination, this one. This was my fastest lap, really pushing it and just able to incrementally increase my speed through that section. Then this corner, a classic trail braking corner, you're always turning and braking and just getting that balance right. If you really smash down the brake and really crank up the steering angle, the car is, it's just not going to turn. So you really have to be careful and mindful of trail braking and just be a lot more considered with your inputs. So eventually I was able to do a 36.9 after about 8 laps of time trialling here, which was not too bad. And so I left Dragon Trail Seaside, aka Def Chicane, in fairly positive spirits. Felt like that was pretty good. That was an FR car. This is an MR car. So the Supra, engine at the front, the weight at the front, tends to understeer. The Audi R8, this car is quite infamous for being a very oversteery machine with the engine at the back. And so I felt like it was quite important to differentiate between the two, the FR and the MR, and give this Audi R8 a go around Deep Forest. And to be honest, it felt instantly drivable. I still had to be thoughtful of my inputs, especially here on the hairpin. Just went in way too hot and just wanted to understeer completely, so I got that wrong there. But the next lap, or 2 laps later, it was a lot better. Just getting on the brakes a little bit earlier, lifting off the brakes, just being again considered. Going to be a word I'm going to be using a lot for this video. And overall, I was quite happy with that Audi R8. Even next up, the Lamborghini Huracan. This is a car that is probably even worse than the R8 in terms of oversteer. And what I noticed was that, yes, it retained its character. It still wanted to oversteer, but it was a lot more manageable. As long as I didn't really overdrive the car, it actually wanted to go around these corners. And Fuji final sector, as we're driving here, is really not an easy set of corners, especially in this car. And so being able to drive this somewhat comfortably on the limit, it felt good. So Group 3, you know, I've covered those cars a lot, and for me, it's a really positive change. But how about something like this? The Porsche 959 decided to take it around Maggiore, and kind of like the Mustang earlier, it felt quite nice to drive. The road cars in the past, as I described earlier, just felt really heavy, and but now they just feel a bit more, I don't know, they just feel a bit more alive, and I think the physics overall feel a bit more alive. They do feel a bit more difficult, but for me, overall it's better. Now, I went for this move, and this kind of demonstrates if you really push a bit too hard, it's just not going to work. Braking way too late, and the car just did not want to behave. But it wasn't the car's fault, it was my fault. And here, I definitely did not try to wipe out the AI. I'm not sure why you'd even think that I did that. So I had to finish that race in second. It's quite unfortunate that the file corrupted there at the wrong moment. And a big change here is Formula cars. Let's take a look at this, the Super Formula. And the aero profile has changed on these cars, and so they feel a little bit different. As you can see, I was having a bit of a hard time getting to grips with the car. So I jumped into this race around Watkins Glen, and it's hard for me to really differentiate between what this car felt like before compared to now, because I haven't really driven it all that much in this game. But what I definitely did notice was that I could follow other cars quite closely, and so it seemed like the dirty air was decreased to some extent. It's hard to really put a finger on exactly how much, but the car did feel good. It felt like it was workable, it was manageable, but you could still drive it on the edge. Now, something else that's changed is tyre wear, and I wanted to give that a quick test. Tyre wear is going to be something that it's hard to really understand unless you play the game quite a lot, so this is quite a primitive and basic test. It's going to take quite a lot more playing to really fully understand the tyre wear and the caveats of it. But here, Catalonia is a famously difficult circuit for the tyres, especially the left-hand tyres. My second lap there, 40.9. Second lap, 41.3. Third lap, actually no, sorry, this is my fourth lap. This one's going to be slightly slower, so each lap, just the tyre drop-off seemed quite reasonable. A couple of tenths per lap, so 41.7, so 4 tenths between lap 2 and 3, and then 3 and 4 as well. Then the tyres went off a little bit more, half a second there, before the tyres completely died at the end of lap 5. This is on 7 times tyre wear. And as you can imagine, as I'm approaching a right-hander, the car didn't really want to comply with my request to turn right. The understeer was very real by this point, and I was very much struggling. And that was case in point here, as I forgot that there was a wall on the pit entry and said hello to it. And so there's not much to decipher from this. Not sure why I did it then, to be honest, but we're going to have to play the game a lot more to really understand tyre wear. But then I felt like jumping onto the controller, because I feel like obviously there's going to be a lot of players on the controller on Gran Turismo 7. And as someone who hasn't really played the controller for many years, it was quite hard to fully grasp how much different this is. But it felt workable to me. For someone who hasn't played a controller for like 5 years, this has actually felt pretty decent. I still had to be quite, again, considered with my inputs on the controller. So I had controller sensitivity 3. I changed up to 10 to see what that was like, and I think that 10 was perhaps a bit too much for a car of this level of grip. This is the Group 2 Audi that was just added into the game. I converted it to just under 800 PI, so I could do it for this race. So I could use it for this race. And 10 felt maybe a bit too much for a very grippy car, but something like this, the Camaro, it felt manageable. It felt workable. I would say that maybe something a bit lower is probably the best way to go. Something like a 5 or a 6 on the controller sensitivity. But you're going to have a play around with that to work out exactly what is best for you. But overall, I think this physics update 1.31, for me, is positive. I actually really like the new physics. I think that when the game first came out, the physics were way too difficult, and the cars just had this ridiculous snap oversteer, and it was just almost impossible to drive on the limit. But then we went to a stage where the cars felt way too sort of heavy, and you could really just throw the cars in without much thought. And now you really do have to think about the way you drive. It's definitely a bit more of a sim compared to before. But please do let me know your thoughts. Tell me if I'm completely wrong in the comments. And in the meantime, have an amazing day. I'll catch you next time. Goodbye.